I am Joanne Wilson, primarily from the Montgomery, Alabama area. I actually became involved with family courts back in 2008. I had a friend that lost custody of her children and was accused of abusing her child and went before the grand jury. She pretty much lost everything that she had, and what had happened is her husband was $50,000 behind in child support, and she was about to go back to court to try to recoup some of that money. She dropped the child off at school on a Friday with a cheerleader uniform on, and the father picked her up after school, and he returned the child to school on Monday. And when the child came back, the school reported abuse. The child had been beaten pretty bad, and they asked the daughter who had beaten her, and she said her mother. And so it ended up basically, my friend went before the grand jury. The father, we really don't know yet who beat the child, but it was not her. She was acquitted by the grand jury, but of course she lost everything she had trying to stay out of jail. And so I went through that horrible situation with her, not understanding, I thought like everybody else that when you got in front of a judge and you told the truth, at least your story would be heard, and people look for a fairness there. And all of a sudden, the events that were happening just didn't make sense, because DHR refused to listen to any of her witnesses, and she had the principal at the school that saw her drop the child off on Friday, and she had the teacher who saw the child on Friday. There was a lot of evidence that she didn't do anything, but I mean, it took her all the way to the grand jury to finally prove her innocence. 5 years later now, the child has come forward and said her mother did not beat her. Excuse me one second. Y'all, I'm picking up. So, after I went through this horrible situation with my friend, amazingly, my son got a divorce. He married a girl that we had asked him not to marry because she was 30, wanted a baby, but she didn't want a husband, and she told everybody that. And we told him that he was going to get married, they were going to have a child, and she was going to leave him. And that's exactly what happened. We did not know that she had a domestic violence charge in her first marriage. And then when he went to court, and him wanting to be a good father and go to the doctor's appointments, with a baby and be a part of the baby's life, and she beat him up in the doctor's office. And so I started talking to some people about domestic violence issues and things that were going on in the court. And I happened to talk to someone that he told me, he said, Joanne, the attorneys in the state of Alabama are making money off the backs of our children. And I asked him, I said, what do we do about that? And he said, we've got to expose this. We have got to tell people. He was over domestic violence at that time. And so I started just looking at this, and of course we still have a situation with our son. The girl left Texas. Our grandchild is 4 years old, and we haven't seen him since he's 5 months old. And she basically, it was funny, the attorney that represented her also represented other of my family members. The attorney's name was Dixie Talbert. Her father was Supreme Court Justice here in Alabama years ago. But Dixie represented two of my daughters in some issues, plus my niece, and then turned around and represented his wife. So I was basically fighting my own attorney. We filed a bar complaint that it was a conflict of interest, but of course the bar here in Alabama, they don't do anything to regulate their industry. There's some good attorneys in the state, but there's some bad ones too that somebody needs to look at that. So over the course of the last few years, I started trying to be more of an advocate for domestic violence and child abuse, and one of the things that I came up against in trying to get some legislation, child abuse a few years ago was not a Class 1 felony in the state of Alabama. I don't think it is there yet, even though they're trying to make some progress. But I kept coming up against an organization called the Alabama Family Rights Association, where they were all fighting for 50-50 custody, where I was basically trying to lobby and get legislation for 100-0 custody, because most of the people I was talking to and working with were victims of child abuse or domestic violence. So anyway, I'd really just about given up on this whole issue. This good old boy home cooking system that goes on down here in Alabama was almost just too much for the normal person to deal with, and so I had really just about given up. And I got a call one day from a friend, and she said, "Have you heard of the Alabama Family Rights Association?" I said, "Well, yeah. It seems like our bills are on opposite sides of the fence, and I can't get help for domestic violence because you've got these fit families fighting in court." So I met the folks with Alabama Family Rights, and though I don't agree with everything they fight for, we tried to find some common ground, and that was a great opportunity for me to start seeing the other side, because fit parents take up so much of our time in court. The child's being used as a pawn, the attorneys smell money, and so, all of a sudden you step in court and people think, well, I'm going to step in there and it'll be fair, whatever. But, it never turns out like that. Your children become a ward of the state in the state of Alabama. So I also try to counsel people into staying out of court if they're a fit family. If you've got a mother and a father and they both have a good job and they're not on drugs and they've not had any criminal records or anything like that, you better stay out of the courts in Alabama. We've got domestic violence issues, which is pretty much what I deal with. Alabama is number 2 in domestic violence homicide. And everybody's trying to cover it up. They don't want you to know. They'll say it was because, 2 people were drinking or got out of control, or, they were gambling or something happened. Actually, what's going on is these custody battles in Alabama have gotten so bad that they're killing each other. There was a case up in north of here where a brother-in-law killed the father. His brother-in-laws shot at each other, and one killed the other one because they've been in a custody battle for 3 years. And so families just can't take anymore. And when I started this quest, I started with the governor's office. I had a friend there who was the legal aide to Governor Riley. He told me to write a letter to Sue Bell Cobb, who's then Supreme Justice of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I know that she got that letter because I was a friend of her secretary, and she assured me she read it. But I talked to her then about what we were seeing, where people were expecting a fairness, and judges were giving children who have been molested and abused to the very people that are abusing and molesting them. And you ask, well, how in the world would that happen? Well, I'll tell you how it happens. You get an attorney, and he or she postpones the child abuse or the domestic violence abuse charge until after the custody case. So these attorneys go in front of these judges, they keep all this information from the judges, and then the judge makes a ruling, and then they have their case on child abuse and all this other stuff that never goes on the record. And I was very involved in the Patricia Warner cases, and that was one of the issues that we had that enraged everybody so bad. It wasn't that we all got a bad deal. It wasn't that we all got a bad shake. It was the fact that Patricia Warner was giving children to the very people who had molested and beaten them. And she looked the other way with doctor's reports, police reports. And so when I started my investigation, I have seen court clerks throw away papers. I have seen court clerks file a response to a charge before the charge. I have seen an attorney get up and walk in there and ask a judge to recuse themselves from a case. They do pretty much anything they want to do because they know we don't have the money, we don't have the time, and emotionally the wear and tear that it has taken on the families of Alabama, I don't know really how much longer it's going to last until we're also number 1 in domestic violence homicide and football. So you know, it's getting to the point where, you know, they're not taking our lawnmowers. And what aggravates me with this legislature and the Alabama Bar Association is they say, well, you know, y'all need to be nice. Y'all need to talk in a nicer way. Y'all need to be whatever. Well, you know, where are the guidelines that when a judge who has total discrepancy over your life and total discretion and can go in and take your child in 15 minutes and totally turn your family upside down, bankrupt you totally, where are the guidelines and the rules on how to behave about that? We are angry. We are upset. We are afraid. You know, it's getting to the point where, you know, people don't really understand domestic violence, parental alienation, and child abuse. But what they don't understand is these are learned behaviors. So when boy and girl are sitting there and they're going, oh, I love you, what kind of flowers are we going to have? You know, you don't have one of the partners stepping up going, oh, by the way, you need to know that I was molested or a victim of child abuse. That doesn't come out till years later. So what I'm telling the Alabama Bar Association and the legislators of this state is, you may think you're immune to it, but with these learned behaviors continuing to grow in the state of Alabama, it may not be your children, but it could be your grandchildren who marry an abused child, a molested child, and then guess what? It's laying on your doorstep. So, you know, people don't understand the psychologies of these things, but at the same time, Carol Gillard, who is over the Alabama Coalition of Domestic Violence, told me that she has classes all the time for these judges to sit in and learn about domestic violence and child abuse, but they don't have time to do it. So I don't know where the issues are other than we talk about this Title D money. It was amazing when we started putting pressure on Sue Bell Cobb to tell us where all this money was going that was allocated to bring families together. There was money set aside to help fathers who couldn't pay child support or didn't want to pay child support because they felt like it was helping the ex-wife and her new husband, whatever. But there was money allocated to the state of Alabama to keep these men out of jail and help them to get on their feet to pay child support. That program was done away with. There was also money that was allocated to sit down and help parents do a parenting plan, to sit down and what was best for their children, to come together and make decisions together. That program was done away, but nobody knows where the money went. So when we started asking Sue Bell Cobb on Facebook and in the paper and everything that we could do, she stepped down, which was conveniently right just a few weeks after Patricia Warner was disbarred by the Supreme Court. So, you know, it's nothing new. It's going over. I have friends in Scotland. I have friends in the UK that are battling this same type of corruption. It's all over the world. It's not just in Alabama. It's everywhere. But one thing that I have found out as I have began now my investigation service, I do pro bono work. We have people of domestic violence and child abuse that call the Alabama Family Rights Association. They are a fit family organization. They focus on your constitutional rights or your constitutional rights being violated. You have a right to your children and your children have a right to you. So that's where they focus on. They don't deal a lot with domestic violence and child abuse. So they have started sending those calls to me. Kenneth Paschal and I met over 3 months ago with, talked to Nancy Buckner, Commissioner of DHR. She put me in a meeting for 3 hours with her chief legal counsel, Sharon Fuqua. And I told Sharon, I said, you know, I don't want to come in here and tell you how to do your job. But in my trying to assist some of these family court victims, occasionally I get stories where the people tell me that the DHR caseworker has not been to their house. Now, DHR has taken their children, but they've not gone to the school, they've not interviewed the children, they've not come to their house, they've not talked to their witnesses, they just came, got the kids, and left. So I told Sharon, I said, what I would like to do is try to work in a joint effort, primarily keep them out of a bunch of lawsuits, because my tax money is going to be the one paying for those lawsuits. So I said, you know, I can't save every child in the state of Alabama, but I can try to save one at a time. So I had an agreement with DHR that I would try to give them some cases where I felt like the children were in danger. I don't get in the he said, she said of the parents. That's not my job. I want to make sure that the children are protected. Now, if the parents are fighting over this child, and that's, that's what they decided to do, at least try to remove the child from the element. I have sent 5 cases to DHR. Immediately after that, they've been involved in the cases. They have the paperwork. They've been to court. They've pulled the children or not pulled the children. And, they've yet to even call some of these people back. So, I am thankful that some people are getting an opportunity to share their stories. I listen to tons of stories, and a lot of the reasons I do that is because nobody wants to hear it. They don't want to hear that you've lost your job, you can't sleep at night, you're an emotional wreck, you're contemplating suicide, you think about leaving the country, you just have given up hope, you have no money left. Even if you did get your children back, there's no money to help support them, give them a college education. Most of the victims I work with, which is getting close to over 100 now, of domestic violence and child abuse, one case, in the Warner case, they spent $93,000, and the child is still residing with the man that molested her. There's a doctor's report she was molested. There was a police report that he was a 2-time domestic violent offender, but the child's still there. Have another child that was circumcised at age 9 because the mother decided all of a sudden, against a court order, not to circumcise a child, against doctor's orders not to circumcise a child, she circumcised the child. Now, at age infancy, I can understand that. Even a child 13 to 15 who can sit down and make that decision if that, is something they want to do. But I can't imagine a 9-year-old boy waking up from anesthesia and part of his genitals have been removed. How do you explain that? That's child abuse to me, and DHR knows about it, and they've yet to do anything about that. Now the child's so medicated and acting up in school, they're having some hard times. Another child down in Randolph County, the pictures, he is being abused. Already had a senator call the district attorney about that one. There was sort of a preliminary hearing. They don't know who's beating the child. The child is being beaten. The pictures are evident on that. The DHR worker testified that, well, the parents fight a lot, and that's the reason the child's beaten. So there's just such an inconsistent lack of caring, and I am asking our senators and our legislators and people to step forward. Just because it hasn't knocked on your doorstep doesn't mean it won't be. But I'm thankful to Lawless America to give these people an opportunity to share their stories. And we may not see the promised land in my lifetime, but I will die trying. Thank you.
Great job.
Good job. Thank you.